In 2001, Lynn Green wrote the first major monograph on Wilhelmina Barnes-Graham, which she called Wilhelmina Barnes-Graham, A Studio Life. This was written while the artist was still alive, and she played a major role in what was finally included in the book. Last Saturday, an exhibition, Wilhelmina Barnes-Graham, a Scottish artist in St Ives, opened at Penley House Museum and Art Gallery in Penzance, curated by Lynn Green, which continues for 2 months. The paintings and photographs mostly come from the Barnes-Graham Charitable Trust, which is based in Edinburgh, and which has been looking after the estate since the artist's death in St Andrews, Scotland in 2004. Just a few weeks ago, the Trust presented the St Ives Archive with digital copies of Wilhelmina Barnes-Graham's diaries and notes from 1940 and 1941, together with some correspondence from the mid-1940s to the early 1950s. In Lynn Green's absence, due to ill health, the Trust has given me permission to read from a number of these documents, which, together with images of her paintings and contemporary photographs from the archive and other sources, throw a fascinating and important light on the artist's early responses to wartime St Ives and the people she met. We need to remember that Wilhelmina Barnes-Graham, after 1960, when she inherited the large house Balmungo at St Andrews in Fife from her beloved aunt, spent half her life in Scotland, the home of her birth and where she had gone to art college, and half the time in St Ives. Both places were equally important and had a profound effect on her painting, but here in Cornwall we tend to think of her as a St Ives artist. I believe it's very timely that for the first time, with these documents that have been deposited, researchers will be able to look at the artist in greater depth in the town that she made her permanent home in 1942. As far as the paintings themselves that I am showing are concerned, apparently Wilhelmina Barnes-Graham painted many works in St Ives, but as she had little money to live on, she had to economise, and so she would paint over works she had already done. This means that many of her paintings, her early paintings, are lost to us. Now, I just give you a little bit of background, having read the first part of Lynn Green's book, because her monograph, which is very detailed, is certainly excellent, and it talks a lot about her early artistic life and her art training. I'll only give a brief outline in order to set the scene for her arrival in St Ives as an experienced artist. At the age of 18 in 1930, she visited France for the first time and saw the modern French artists. In October 1931, she enrolled at Edinburgh College of Art. The quality of teaching was very high, and those who taught her were an important influence on her future work. She suffered from ill health from time to time, which prevented her from having full-time education. The other important thing is that she became very friendly with Margaret Mellis, who was at the same college as her between 1930 and 1934. Here's a nice photograph which was taken in her Portsmouth studio in St Ives, 1946. She was a very handsome young woman, quite small, those of you who may know her. And here's a photograph of her and Margaret Mellis at the college in the 1930s, which I think is a lovely photograph. In 1935, she began to win some scholarships. They weren't very much money, but it was a great help to her, and she spent some time in London. She actually graduated from the college in 1937 and did a post-diploma year, and then went back to Paris with Margaret. She was going to take up a scholarship in a number of European countries in 1939, but of course the war intervened. When war came, it was decided that she should come to Cornwall, as Margaret was already here and she could find new artistic stimulation. And it was also felt it would be good for her precarious health. She hoped that this experience would enable her to become an independent and mature artist. This is the inside cover of her notebook. She actually started this in 1939. The notes she wrote were for 1940 and 1941. And it was a time when she came backwards and forwards, partly because she still had links with the college in Edinburgh during those 2 years. And secondly, because sometimes her health, although they thought it would be good for her down here, there were some terrible winters, and so sometimes she couldn't stay here. So she came and went. And she actually wrote down exactly how many weeks she spent here. And she wouldn't put down proper roots in the town until 1942, because by that time her postgraduate studies were officially over from Scotland. And now I'm going to read from these diaries and notes. Diary is probably the wrong word, because very often she wrote after the event and not when she'd just taken part in them. The notes have not been edited. I've obviously made excerpts, but if it doesn't read like proper English, this is what she wrote, and I think it was more important to read what she wrote rather than make up words that she didn't say. So this is from her first entry. St Ives, Cornwall. Arrived after 7 p.m, March the 16th, 1940, after awful journey, 10:30 from Paddington through dull country. Portsmouth, Liscard, perhaps she meant Plymouth, but we don't know. Liscard, Truro, St Erth, St Ives, pouring rain and east wind. This is a photograph of what the harbour would have looked like exactly at that time, which is interesting in the light of the painting she did. The first word she heard, "The stars were too near the moon last night," from cheery Cornish porter, means poor weather. Certainly the next 2 days were awful, grey and wet. Stayed over the weekend at Trelawny Hotel in its own grounds. First impression of St Ives was disappointed. Spent few nights at Little Park Owls, delightful home of Margaret and Adrian Stokes, built of Cornish stone and plenty windows, lawns and trees overlooking Carbis Bay. Interested in collection of paintings in odd shapes of chiefly cardboard of Old Man Wallace, Cornish scenes, black boats, greens and white seas and grey houses, supposed to have influenced Christopher Wood. I found out more addresses from the Porthmeor Gallery, whose exhibition I saw hastily as possible as the lousiest imaginable. Even rotten Spencer tucked in, and the only passable, in my opinion, was a Dodd Proctor back garden. The addresses referred me to the secretary, who I got an introduction to from a lady at the Trelawny, Mrs Woodhead, to Captain Borley Smart, man in yellow +4s and intense pronounced manner of speaking. I later met his wife at tea with Mrs Woodhead. This infected her with the same manner. I gather he enters into everything in St Ives with a capital E. He took me around 4 or 5 possibles or impossibles studios, and eventually, after some bother, reducing of price, I got Commander Bradshaw's studio under the Porthmeor Gallery, number 3, at 7 and 6 a week, furnished, looking onto Porthmeor Beach, North Light and all. The point was that Commander Bradshaw went off to the war, and so he was subletting his studio. She did a number of paintings for the studio, and this is one of them, and you can see the view from the window. The Fuller School of Painting is a few doors along. It gives me rather a shock to find as completely resembled a dream I had months ago of coming out of a room with a green door, down green wooden steps where I had been happy with other people. The Fuller School, which I do not intend to join, has these green stairs, that proportion and direction. This is the third or fourth time in 12 months I've realised this dream to realities. Barbara Hepworth. Margaret Stokes rang me up, invited me to move into Little Park Owls, and the evening before staying, I went up to see them. I met Barbara Hepworth. Margaret wore navy trousers and jacket, brown suede sandals. Barbara the same, but for a blue silk handkerchief tied round her head. Her pale face, sharp nose, and small lipsticked mouth, and narrow brown eyes. I noticed her movements were quick and neat, her voice clipped and quiet. A capable organiser, I'm told. She sat on the floor. Miriam and Nam Gabo I met 2 days later. Barbara Hepworth that evening discussing the wireless news bulletin. They are staying in a cottage nearby with maid and the triplets. She means Barbara Hepworth. The Gabbos very near to in bungalow with the awful name of Fairystone. Miriam opened the door. I was excited in anticipation, having read about his work and listened to Gabbo on the wireless in January, series Artist in the Witness Box. In 2 minutes, small passage to small room, met Miriam, Nam Gabbo, the big Russian white Satchka, which is a big dog, or Sweetie Pie, as Miriam calls him, Mink the Siamese cat, bits of glass in triangles over the table, and a lovely view over Carbis Bay. We had tea and a walk on the beach, Miriam, Margaret, Satchka and me. Gabbo is older, and I've met him several times now as I write. That first time I was somewhat excited. He had been working, and then after tea decided to mow the lawn and brought in a bright blue and scarlet mower. He speaks English very poorly. I like him so much, I gather everyone does. He and Ben Nicholson dislike music. Gabbo is dark, going bald, smallish, wore brown trousers, white woolen jersey and red tie. Sherry party. Easter Monday, Adrian and Margaret gave a delightful sherry party at Little Park Owls in their studio. The guest of honour was Herbert Reed. Herbert Reed was brought by Barbara and Ben Nicholson, with whom he was feeding and staying at nearby guest house. They also brought Mr. and Mrs. John Summerson, a delightful pair. Mrs. Summerson is Barbara Hepworth's sister and is a ballet dancer. Tall, dark girl, and wore exciting bright purple trousers and scarlet jumper of blue and red material round her head. John, such a nice, tall, reserved man, I had opportunity to know more of later as he came to my studio and opened the window for me and took me to coffee at the Seagull another day. He used to be on the architectural staff of Edinburgh College of Art in 1932. Now writes architectural reviews, I think. Most of us sat on the floor, and Desmond Burnell, who was Margaret Gardner's partner, began a discussion about the Bronze Age, with drawings, and there was a hushed silence. And I'll never forget those 4 women sitting together and their colours. Margaret Gardner, pink and green, Mrs. Summerson, purple and red, blue suede sandals, Barbara Hepworth, cerise-coloured jacket, dark green jumper, dark green corduroy trousers, sandals, hanky round head and net. Miriam Gabbo, navy trousers, white top. Margaret and I in background, she in navy trousers and jacket and purple jumper, me in purple dress and yellow corduroy jacket and fur cap. Herbert Reed gave me a wonderful Mexican cigarette out of a yellow packet. The cigarette was black and strong. He'd bought it that morning in Penzance. He's a charming person to talk to, with lethargic ease of manner. He's gone much greyer since I last saw him at a lecture some years ago in Edinburgh, where he was in fine arts there. Now, this is a page which is very interesting because she decided to write subjects noted. So she's written, look, palm trees at Porthminster Hotel and Dunvegan Garden, Carbis Bay, and pine trees at Little Park Owls, and views. This is what she was interested in, and some of these became paintings. So here's rather fine drawing, St Ives from the Gap. So that's one of the gaps in the buildings as you go along the wharf, looking over to Porthminster. John Park, small rugged man with a drinker's face. A Lancashire man and a tremendous sense of humour. His conversation slow but held you. Lives near the Sloop Inn. I gather he is one of the few artists in St Ives without an income of his own, and apart from letting 2 cottages, lives on his painting. The centre of the White House by the harbour he let to Stanley Spencer about 4 years ago. Saw John Park and Fred Bottomley too. The latter has given me an invitation to the opening of another exhibition at the Porthmere Monday. Like to see the people, but oh, the paintings of the other show. St Ives Society of Artists. As you see, these were still in Porthmere. Spring exhibition, April the 9th. A terrible day. News arrived of Germany invading Norway and Denmark. The exhibition was opened by Mr. R. Morton Nance, welcomed by Mr. Fuller on behalf of Mr. Moffat Linder. It was a depressing show of too many crowded, all of a same standard. Some competent drawing. Tea was given, and there were a number present, mainly elderly men and women. I got an impression of everybody being important over a number of insignificant paintings. John Park introduced me to his wife. Father Delaney was there. He was the Catholic priest. Captain and Mrs. Borlase Smart, who were kind and spoke to me. They may be awful painters, but extremely kind people. An evening at the Arts Club. Here we are. April the 13th. The Arts Club is a funny old building in the Warren, the top half of which is black planks. There's a light blue door, and plays and dancing performed there, and has a reading room to which all members have keys. The season really is October to April, and this was the official last night, but they sometimes continue with Saturday dancing. They were doing a second performance of Shaw's play, The Admiral Bashville, and it was excellent. Costumes good, scenery by John Barclay, a Scotch artist. I met him later in the evening. To be a member of the club, you have to be an artist, writer, actor or musician. April the 25th. Had more high seas and gales since I last wrote, and everything dripping and sodden. My studio leaking and impossible to work in, and I was stiff with rheumatism. This lasted 3 or 4 days. Now I am painting a portrait of Joan Manning Sanders and her baby, and it is no pleasure. The baby yells all the time and has to be put out on the balcony, and she hasn't any idea of posing. The whole affair has made me cross, for it was an arrangement between Joan and me, and he, I presume she means her husband, Joan's husband, said because the baby had to be done, it had to be painted in their place. Mr. Fuller holds a life class for artists, Thursday evenings, 5 to 7, for which you pay 1 shilling, held in a largest studio in his School of Painting. Since 4 turned up last time, they were anxious for more. There were about 20 of us there, and from what I saw, the standard was very low. Mr. Fuller told me of good, inexpensive rooms, 9 Porthminster Terrace. I must visit and inquire further. I realised, coming down the little green steps, the queer sensation of the completion of my dream. I have decided to share my studio to cut down expenses. Anyway, I use it more as a storeroom than workroom. With better weather, should be quite a sensible arrangement. We might share a model. Miss Vale, lady in her 40s, lived mostly in Italy and is an interesting, almost humorous character, really a miniature painter of prints in oils and exhibits successfully. May the 15th. Had such a wonderful spell of really hot weather for 2 weeks. Have attempted sketching out of doors. Began 2 oils of palm trees, lemon yellow, light red, cobalt and white. Also drawings, roof composition for watercolour notes. But such misery and trouble in the world. April the 9th, I wrote of invasion of Norway by Germany. Now May the 16th, the invasion of Belgium and Holland. St Ives now an evacuated area for children. Some of the larger hotels are taken over and the beaches are patterned with brown bodies on white sands. Cockney with Cornish. Some of these children are really beautiful. Beginning of July, I went to summer exhibition of paintings at the Porthmere Gallery. Some good ladies spoke and appealed to artists to go on painting beauty. The exhibition was one of the highest I ever cared to see. October the 30th, Margaret Medina, I don't know who Margaret Medina is, I'm sorry. I met at Mr. Fuller's evening class. She was posing in a black frock and lace shawl against a light ochre background. She really is a find. Goya and Degas would be proud of her. Oval, sallow face, grapey eyes and mouth, distinctive eyebrows and black hair loose yet high crowned. Her movements are superb. I'm doing a portrait of her and should really enjoy doing another, as this has lost its original decorative and dramatic quality and gone more contemplative. She is a highly intelligent girl too, and an aristocratic looking creatures. She is young and married to a very dark-looking Englishman, who I gather is a painter and out of work. And they came to St Ives and are living for the present in a caravan. Mrs. Rogers of the Sloop. I'm painting in the Sloop. This is a job. The light is poor and time limited, 2:45 to 4 o'clock. I hope to keep this a decorative composition, in a different colour scheme to my recent paintings, using yellow, alizarin crimson, viridian green. She is a handsome, clear-cut woman with most distinctive hairdressing and a charming, attractive personality, tall and angular, with a sensuous mouth. Something of the Duchess of Windsor style. So she has often been told, and I can see it. Mrs. Rogers gives me tea after, upstairs in a tiny, well-furnished room overlooking the harbour. A wonderful orange russet-thick carpet, and when the light is on it, oh. Then she went back to Scotland. St Ives, 1941. March and April. Arrived at St Ives on the eve of 19th of March to the Penolva Hotel and remained there until 3rd of May. High seas and heavy gales, lovely colours of stone greys, fawns, greens, whites and blacks, a severe winter. Studio supposed to be mended, but still leaking. Got neuritis like last year. Worked mainly in bedroom at ideas for compositions in poster on watercolour paintings and made and ordered mounts for last year's sketches. Worked out some studies of little black, grey and white sheds on back of island, trying to use the fewest colours and convey the true Cornish feeling, grey and greenness and childish decorative pattern, using perhaps just Indian ink, now difficult to obtain, viridian green and white. And I thought that's what she was painting. Porthgwydden was quite an industrial area then. I gave a party which turned out a great success. I cleared the studio, put chairs each side of pink walls, and down by my large window onto the sea had 2 long tables in a row, one with green, black, white striped cloth, which I put pale blue plates of radishes, potato crisps, sandwiches and glasses, cakes, bottles, mugs. I asked the Stokes for flowers, and Margaret sent down such a superb bouquet I nearly gave up the idea of a party to paint them. I put a light background against them and placed on stove, centre of one wall, almost the first thing people saw on entering, large red and pink poppies, lupins, blue and pink and green foliage. It carried through my colour scheme of pink and black with flashes of scarlet yellow, bottle green and blue perfectly. Various people helped me with glasses tied with coloured string to identify, and some people helped with food and dishes. My only regret was not hiring a radiogram. I had 2 gramophones, each deciding to be a nuisance. The party began at 8:15, and I had to tell the party to close 2 a.m, as I was a trifle nervous of cigarettes in the dark, as pitch by then, the blackout of my large windows out to sea. We had dancing. Several people came the next day to express their thanks for my party and said they so enjoyed my colour scheme and tables for wartime. I spent enough energy. It wasn't a large party, and in drink cost me £3. It could never have been so successful but for the help given by different friends. I borrowed records from the Arts Club. Wednesday the 22nd, I went to see Gabbo. Met Peter Lanyon there, young Cornish boy, now in Air Force, a painter and very keen on constructivists. Gabbo and Ben Nicholson seemed very interested in him. Once a pupil of Fuller's, saw some of his paintings, wild, woolly and keen, and later constructivist experiments in his studio, unknown to him. I think she means that he didn't know that she'd visited his studio. Saturday the 25th, went to see Dr. Atkinson. Got temporary certificate saying unfit for work in any of the services. Have to register November the 8th. Mention this as possibility of painting being disturbed with bad effects on my work and energy. Though now, as I write some months later, wonder if it wouldn't be great advantage to go with the swim. Now, that's where it really finishes, because that's the end of 1941. But the whole point was that by November 1941, women who were able had to do war work of some kind, and her health wasn't very good, and she didn't know what to do. But in 1942, when her connections with Edinburgh College of Art finally came to an end because her postgraduate money had ceased, she decided that she would try, and she moved back to St Ives, and she decided to do some war work, and she started making camouflage nets, as did many other local women and girls. And here's an interesting drawing that she did. She did a couple. She didn't do them on site. She remembered everything. I should have said that her paintings of St Ives were never done outdoors. Nobody was allowed during the war to paint outdoors. Here's the island factory. This is a posed photograph of the fishermen actually making nets. She actually had to give up making the camouflage nets because she got dermatitis on her hands, so she took up knitting string vests. The next section, there are 3 sections altogether. In 1943, a large number of American soldiers arrived in St Ives for training prior to the D-Day landings in France on 6th of June 1944. These men, most of whom were very young and left their homes for the first time, never survived the invasion and its aftermath. And they had a significant effect on many people of the town. of all ages, especially the young women. The Americans left St Ives towards the end of May and gathered at Trebar Gardens, from where they crossed the Channel ready for the invasion. In Wilhelmina Barnes-Graham's correspondence collection, there are several letters from a private Robert Wagner in May 1944, after he had met her during his time in St Ives. He was to write 4 letters to her from 17th of May to the 29th of May. They obviously had become very close. Wilhelmina Barnes-Graham wrote quite passionate letters to him for a couple of months. Now, the interesting thing is the letters that she wrote to him were addressed from the 6th the Warren. Now, 6th the Warren is literally just outside the door, a few yards up the road. And it is that building there which is now called Blue Mist. Now, this first letter that I'm going to read was actually written on Tuesday, the 6th of June 1944. Bob, darling, well, the news has come through today. For myself, I didn't know until lunchtime at the Copper Kettle. It's a big shock, yet a relief. I can hardly say anything other than God be with us. And you, Bob, when the time comes, whatever it is, have my prayers around you. She often writes about the Copper Kettle, which was a really important tea place on Wharf Road, and extraordinarily in Austin Wormleyton's book on John Park, he shows this photograph of the inside of it in 1947, and on the far left hand side is Wilhelmina Barnes-Graham, which is wonderful. So you can see what it was like. It was owned by Pop Short, and he had it for many years, and he loved the artist, and you see the walls are absolutely covered in paintings. And he was very good about, even later on, giving impecunious artists who'd turned up on the doorstep, he'd give them jobs like doing the washing up, which was really kind. 6th the Warren, Saturday the 10th of June 1944. Darling Bob, hello, writing in my bedroom, waiting for lunch. The wireless booming downstairs. Lillimore cooking. Mitchie not back. It's 1:15 and Jim just in from doing odd jobs in the town, and have arranged to do a head drawing this afternoon of Mabel's daughter, Mabel of the wooden leg. Her daughter is quite lovely really, like a fawn, young dear, brown eyes and red hair. She is only here for a few days. Now, she's talking about Mabel Lethbridge, who had a daughter called Susan, and Susan was the first wife of Brian Winter, and she had a shop in the Dyje making toys, and it was called the Toy Trumpet. Mabel Lethbridge was quite a character. She worked in a munitions factory in First World War, lit a cigarette and blew her leg off. Quite a character. Anyway, it just so happened that Wilhelmina Barnes-Graham had painted the interior of the Toy Trumpet. Interestingly, Steve Litherland, who happened to own 6th the Warren, it's the chairman here, which is one of these life's extraordinary coincidences, tells me that the gallery in front actually became the Toy Trumpet when the Toy Trumpet closed down in the Dyje. So there's another lovely connection. After I'm having tea at the kettle with the girl from the girls' school, she wants me to do a drawing of her too. By the way, while on the point of work, I had a visit from Mrs. Barnes, daughter and husband this week, and they liked the portrait sketch of you. What do you think better than the polyphoto? They liked the drawing, so does Mrs. Morgan, but I must say I was surprised at the painting. Well, they all asked me to send you their love, so here goes. Somebody else sent you a message and spoke very fondly of you. Granted, he'd had a couple of drinks. Yes, it's a he. Mr. Beveridge. I met him one night at the kettle. Joan asked me in about 10:30 p.m. and Bev came in later, fooled with one of the little dogs who bit his thumb and caused blood. Bev just grinned like a schoolboy, and on the way up the Warren asked warmly after you, and he jumped about like a kid. Friday the 16th of June. Dearest Bobbit. Hello dear, how are you? Whatever trials you are going through, keep up, sweet. It's a job and not a permanent one. Fight hard for that sense of proportion. I can understand how you may react, even though I do not share your experiences. Keep a stout heart, and may God's will be done, and help you all in that clarity of purpose. God bless the Americans. That's me speaking. Monday the 29th. Hello dear, just had lunch, and the sun is shining. The sea looks very green, blue, and seagulls crying and flying lazily. This morning I cleared the studio out. Oh, it was filthy. Quite a tiring job. Before I did it, I bought myself a present from you. Her birthday actually was the 8th of June, and he'd obviously left her some money to buy a present. It's what you originally wanted to give me, a white necklace. It's Chinese ivory, bigger than the one Lillimore gave one, much bigger beads. He wanted £2.10 for it, said they were second-hand and come from a good home. Now to go and post. Goodbye, dearie. And again my thoughts, and God take care of you. Hope you're getting some mail okay. Let me know if I can do anything for you. A warm hug from Willie. She wrote letters to him between 31st of May and the 25th of July 1944. The letters came back, stamped as you see. He died on the 18th of June. So the envelopes say deceased on them. Before he left St Ives, he actually gave her an address book containing his next of kin. But at the time she wrote the letters, of course, she didn't know he was no longer alive. And that's the second section. Now, the third section is our letters. She wrote lots of letters, and I'm only reading very few of them, to her beloved aunt, Mary Niece. She was her maternal aunt, and she looked after Wilhelmina Barnes Graham. What I didn't say was that her father had never wanted her to be an artist and gave her a terrible time. And so Aunt Mary absolutely came to her rescue. It was she who secured the ownership of Balmongo House from Wilhelmina Barnes Graham's grandfather, and she generously passed it over to the artist in 1960. Lynn Green, in her book, says that Mary Niece was a woman of insight and determination, and she figures in the artist's life as benefactor and guardian angel, and would come to Willie's rescue in the nick of time on several occasions. We have copies of the letters that she wrote to her aunt between November 1943 to July 1953, but I'm just going to read a few 1947-48. Now, the letter, when she wrote 1947, November the 15th, she wrote she was no longer at 6 the Warren, she was at St Christopher's. There's St Christopher's in Porthmeor Road, and it would later become the home of the Val Bakers. But at this time it was owned by the Keeleys, and they did bed and breakfast and had paying guests. My dearest Muzzy, my only fears are the future about the studios with Borlase Smart's death. There are 13 of these large studios in a block, the Porthmeor ones. I am number 1. Borlase had number 5, and Mr. Fuller, who runs a painting school, has at least 2, and the rest are inhabited by different people. I am the youngest holder. The owner is a man of 95, an artist called Moffat Lindner. He is ill. His daughter has no feelings for the artists. Will inherit the studios. It's a valuable site, and the chances are she'll sell them for hotel site or anything. Well, so far we have first offer of buying. £5,000 is needed. Borlase Smart was the person who was on to all this and arranging meetings and seeing what could be done, whether the Royal Academy, a rich institution, couldn't help, etc., etc. The whole position is at a standstill. The daughter is very queer, I believe, is married, and although I don't know her, she had a car accident many years ago in which she fatally injured somebody, and the fact doesn't seem to have humbled her. So it seems we are up against something. It's very unsettling for Mr. Fuller, and I don't feel too easy myself. I simply don't know where I'd go or put my belongings. I've accumulated quite a bit by now. Easels, canvases, frames, tables, chairs, chests of drawers, etc. However, nothing can happen suddenly, but Borlase's death is really a calamity. I spent last night with Mrs. Smart. She asked me to see her soon, so I phoned and walked up last night. She is up to her ears with press cuttings and letters. She's very brave. She told Mrs. Fuller she felt I'd been one of the ones who really cared. I felt quite heartbroken about his death, and St. Ives will never feel quite the same. Also, he helped so very much. But still, I'm determined to prove to those old stick-in-the-muds here that Borlase picked some winners amongst the younger ones, and if I reach anywhere near that mark, it won't be in vain. He was a wonderful, beloved man. St. Ives has been quite gloomy. There's been wonderful press cuttings, and he was loved in many spheres. How did you know? Was it in the Scottish papers? There was a fine obituary in the Times. His wife is much younger. He was 66, and she is about 48 to 50 now. I have worked hard this week and taken this AM off to wash my hair. I'm staying on here for the time being. Mrs. Keeley, has been kind. The charge to outsiders is 5 guineas. But keep it under your hat, not even a word to Mrs. Everard. She lets me for 3 guineas. And as I don't think I can live much less with what I get, lighting, heating, etc., for a few weeks in winter, and good food and baths, it's worth it. And more time for work and rest too. I get so chesty in winter. So that ought to ease your mind just now. It's only 6 minutes away from studio on the same beach. I don't know if you can make this out, but it's a plan of the studio. Well, it's very interesting. She's obviously divided the studio up into 3 sections, and you need to look quite carefully, but it shows you, it's got some very interesting. I need to reproduce that properly because it's lovely to see. She's got a rug from Scotland there, and that's her writing, which is quite easy to read, I'm very pleased to say. St. Christopher's, St. Ives, December the 9th, 1947. My dearest Muzzy, we have 2 men down here on a government-sponsored write-up, COI they call themselves, Central Office of Information. A feature story of the St. Ives colony, more how they live and work rather than their work. They are staying at St. Christopher's, and it means being awfully careful what one says. I don't altogether approve of it as making a stunt personality thing if not careful. Now here's this really, really famous photograph. They've taken a photo in my studio of a crypt meeting. That is the 5 men and myself who gave a show in August, having a discussion in the studio. The painting on her board, on her easel behind the artists, is actually that painting there, which is lovely. They've taken shots of one working outside too, also several crowd scenes. Lunch at the Copper Kettle, evening at Arts Club, sketching club, art gallery, and various others have been interviewed and taken singly. I helped them to go and do Mr. Fuller's school, and it meant getting hold of model, student. Mrs. Fuller, he is ill just now, otherwise they were going to take it in any place, and I felt it was hard on Mr. F, but it meant a lot of rushing about and trying to work hard. Then I had to attend a meeting about the studios, and next year they are going to double my rent, all the Porthmere ones. There's an idea afoot for the society to try and raise a memorial fund to Borley Smart to buy the studios for the society. £6,000 wanted, and Barclays Bank has offered to loan £3,000, thus the raising of rents next year. And there's the famous photograph of the inside. By that time the St Ives Society had moved to the Mariners' Church. As you see, Wilhelmina Barnes-Graham is third from the left with the hat on, and they set up a fund and collected money there. I've got 2 new works on the go, and they seem to be liked already. It will be a very dull, lonely Xmas, but I'm going to try and work hard, I hope. There's 2 more photographs. There she is coming out of her studio in 1948, just after she wrote this letter. And that photograph there, which is lovely, which is her first one-person show at Downing's bookshop with Mr. Downing. Lots of love, darling, and pray forgive Miss Muddle. Love to Buzzy too, from Willie. Thank you very much.